Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Now, before we get started, I usually don't go through this whole list. I usually just kind of rattle them off. But I want to give you a few calls to action before we start. This is a special conversation today. But before we start, one, I'd love for you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/@politicsandreligion. We're starting to get a few followers on there, but it's a good place. The comments on there are a little bit more free flowing because anybody from anywhere in the world can comment, not just people that I'm directly connected to. But we'd love to get more subscribers on YouTube. Also, follow us on your podcast app. If you're not already following it, you're just getting these episodes kind of randomly. Definitely follow us there. If you're following us on Apple, go ahead to Spotify and follow us there too. We could use all the automatic downloads we could get. I'm sort of half kidding about that, but what we could really use are your reviews on most podcast apps. On Spotify, I think you can only do the stars, but on most podcast apps, you can actually write a review. That'd be really great. And who knows? Who knows? Maybe I'll give you a shout out on one of these shows. Read your review and hey, listen. If you have constructive critiques, I'll engage with that too. But I especially love those 5-star reviews, of course. And then, last but not least, join our Patreon. The support for the program really does help because there's all kinds of subscriptions I got to use, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of effort to do this thing. So your support really does help us keep the lights on. We have links in the show notes to make all this stuff easy to find, and it all helps. We can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with my pal, Gary Keifer. Gary and I go way back to my days when I was around the art scene and doing some theater in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And as it turns out, we've talked a lot about Bucks County on this program because it's a truly swing county and one of the most crucial swing states in most elections in recent history. So when I'm trying to make sense of what's happening in national politics, I think about my good friends back in Bucks County and how they're thinking about all that's happening. And listen, not everybody's the same in Bucks County, obviously. Everybody I know that I had a good friendship with, a good relationship with, they're all different and they all think differently. And they're from all ranges of the spectrum, which reflects Bucks County. So it's been so cool to see my buddy Gary hop on some recent posts and talk some politics and religion without killing each other. Gary, so good to see you, man. How you doing?
Thanks. And I want to say right off the bat that what may seem like for you and your listeners, just you talking to a friend, I've been watching podcasts for about 5 years. I'm in Peru right now. I don't have television. I'm thankful for that, actually. And my one complaint about podcasters is grab a phone book, flip it to a page and put your finger in the phone book and interview someone who doesn't have any connection to anything, who isn't known, right? Just do one every 30 podcasts. Just pick, quote unquote, a common person. Now, if you're trying to build subscribers and you have someone like that on who no one knows, it might be a challenge. But the fact that you're doing this with someone like me who I've never written a book. I have a lot of titles of books I like to write. I used to write comedy, but I don't do that anymore. I used to teach improv. But I don't have a name that people are going to know. But because of that, I have a lot of opinions about politics that I don't think other people are going to have because I'm not tethered. I think when you and I spoke about the title of this, I would say Untethered Expat is a good title. I have zero connection culturally, politically, or anything to America at this point. Nothing, the only thing I will say, I should have mentioned, it's probably not a good year for me to try to collect my Social Security, but in 6 months, we're going to see what happens. And if Elon Musk's name comes out of my mouth followed by a bunch of expletives, I may be back in America if things don't work out. So that is my only connection. And I think because of that, I have some maybe unique perspective that even someone who's got a PhD in political science may not have. So
Well,
thanks for having me on.
yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I always loved hanging out with you when we were, we were in a class together, and then a lot of us ended up getting together after every time at this great bar in Doylestown, Pennsylvania called Poco's. Poco's is still there. In fact, I was there in June, and a bunch of us got together at Poco's. It was really nice to see everybody. A bunch of folks, there's a bunch of people that are still around here and there. So that was nice. But yeah, to your point, I mean, listen, it's great talking to some of the folks, high profile, academics and journalists and politicians, elected officials, religious leaders. That's been a thrill. But at the end of the day, the project for me is about being able to, like, I'm just a regular guy. I don't pretend to be anything other than that.
Right.
So being able to, I've said it all along, like being able to go to the local, the equivalent of the local Pocos, right?
Correct.
Or the coffee shop or the Bible study I was a part of for 10, 15 years, or, whatever activities my kids were involved with. And be able to have a conversation with people in my neighborhood, around the Thanksgiving table, whatever it is. So that's why I've enjoyed the people who are willing to come on. I give you a lot of credit for coming on. A lot
Sure.
of folks just don't want to talk about it, but this is where the rubber meets the road, even more so than as much as of a thrill it's been to talk to the David Brooks and the David Frenches and the Ann Applebaums of the world. This is where it's at. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Can I give you one more point as to why I wanted to do this?
Yeah.
So when I left the country in 2021, so I'm going to travel the world to see where I want to retire. Okay, so I spent 2.5 years in Asia. Just got back from Bangkok. I lived in Bangkok for 2 years. I'm currently in Peru. I made a promise to myself. I'm not going to have a conversation with anyone in America about politics. Not going to do it.
And yet here you are.
Yeah, right. But there's a reason. So I I'm in Peru right now, and it's in rainy season. Okay, rainy season. It's cold and it rains all day. All of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I love to go. I love to go walking, and I love to go hiking, but I can't go out. So now I'm like, okay, let me go. Let me go to Facebook, and let me just do something I probably shouldn't do. So after 2.5 years, an interesting little story. After 2.5 years, I picked a person, another anti-Trumper. I'm a Democrat, right? So all my friends are liberals slash Democrats, which the word, I don't even think they understand what the word liberal is anymore, but that's another, put a pin in that for later. I picked one person who, and I don't think they're going to watch this, but they are an artistic director of a theater company in a former place where I lived. So I wanted to pick someone who, number one, was intelligent and also was probably working with a lot of younger people. And if I wanted to speak honestly about her Trump hatred, because I just gave something away. I didn't want to give away that she was a woman, and I'll tell you why at the end of this. When someone posts, every time Trump does something and they post something on Facebook, my heart sinks. I'm like, look, let's have a real conversation about the relationship between you and your government and why you're so upset right now. So that was my motivation. I'm going to help her by giving some historical background about her party, the Democrats, that I have changed. Because if you're going to call someone a fascist, you can't skip chapter one. And all my friends are skipping chapter one, which is how does this happen? And they don't want to talk about that. So I said, she's smart. So I started with this, just simple fact that I've learned. During the Clinton administration, and I don't know if it was his quote or not, but the Clintons made a tactical decision that I think was wrong. They said, we don't need the labor unions in the working class anymore. Now, Corey, I got to say right off the bat, I don't have a PhD in political science, and anyone listening who knows more history than me, are going to say, wow, he's just, I'm surface stuff, but I know this much. Of the people I listen to, I think he actually said, Bill Clinton actually said, who else are they going to vote for?
Oh,
Horrible, horrible decision, right? So why am I talking to this woman who hates Trump about the Clintons? I'm like, Curry, oh, I just gave her a name. That's not good. See, this is my first podcast. Um, you have to understand the environment that Trump came from. And if you're going to allow your hatred of him to affect your life, that every time he does something, you're posting on Facebook 2 or 3 times a day, like talking about leaving the country. Now, once it gets to that point, I get upset. Like people who leave the country based on the president. My Lord, that's a, put a pin in that one. I said, Curry, do you want to understand why there are individuals in America that perceive that Donald Trump is for the working class, even though he's a billionaire, right? Even though he probably hasn't worked a day in his life. You got to go back to the Democrats and the perception of individuals in the country that led to this, and start there. Because if you start there and realize, hey, it's my party that may have left a huge gap for this fascist to take hold. By the way, I don't call him that, but other people do. So understand, I'm talking to a person who thinks he's a fascist, and I'm trying to help her understand fascism just doesn't, it's taking the place of something that doesn't exist. So let me shift to immigration, because truthfully, I said this to you 10 minutes ago. Donald Trump had one policy, immigration. Now, can I give you, I used to write comedy, okay? So I'm going to give you a little teeny script. It's not funny, but I think this conversation may have happened, okay? Donald Trump was at the National Press Club. Do you know this story? And Barack Obama insults
yeah,
him.
yeah.
Okay,
2012 or so, 2011, 2012, maybe. Yeah.
right. It is not hyperbole to say that. That's probably when Donald Trump said, you know what? This dude just insulted me. And because of my personality, I'll show him, right? So he starts to think he can be president. And he meets, let's say, for example, a Steve Bannon. This is a complete made up story. And he says, Steve, if I were to consider this, what would you suggest? And Steve would say, you got one thing going for you. I want you to pretend you care about immigration. Now I know, since you own hotels and casinos, you probably employed thousands of illegal immigrants over your years. And but there's one void that the Democrats have created for the past 30 years. I think it was Reagan. I just did some research before I hopped on with you. I think it was Reagan in '86 who passed that bill about the Dreamers. So '86 to 2016, that's 30 years. And that's 30 years of a group of people who are not happy with illegal immigration, and no one's doing anything. So Bannon says, that's your policy. That's what you're going to win on. You just got to do one thing, Donald. Pretend you give a shit about immigration. Because I know you don't,
Yeah.
but you got to pretend. And at no point can you ever fault, or there can't be a memo out there that shows the world that this is all some political scheme.
But I think that with Trump, even if something did get out there that he flip-flopped, because listen, his hiring practices to this day are pretty well known for anybody who cares to pay any attention. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he's the WWF president or the WWE president. They know that he's just it's play acting, but they like the play acting that he's doing. Not they. I shouldn't say they. A lot of people who are into it enjoy the game because he's throwing out red meat to the people that they want to that they want to feed on their hatred for. So, I think that's a part of it. I'm speaking in generalities now, which often gets me into trouble. But my point is, I think even if some things that he said here and there, or what his real feelings are, listen, the bottom line is he has no real feelings. He has no real beliefs. And a lot of people who are his avid followers, this is what you and I were talking about offline. A lot of his diehard followers don't care because at the end of the day, what they do care about is something that J.D. Vance, is now vice president, said, which is he hates the right people. So that's I think at the end of the day, that's his basic currency. Yes, there are certain issues that I think at the end of the day moved enough voters from your hometown, one being immigration, another being inflation. For folks like that, immigration and inflation definitely mattered. Maybe crime as a tertiary one. But he it doesn't it wouldn't matter if he said something different about immigration or immigrants. It wouldn't matter because it's baked into the cake with Trump.
Correct. Now, I want to ask you a question because this is where I think I've come to a different conclusion about what immigration is. Let me back up a second to kind of understand who I am. So when I was driving to college, I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh. Now I'm I'm a liberal through and through, but he would make me laugh because he would say such um, incendiary things that I thought that were complete BS. They make me laugh. But the one thing he was the first person he said to follow it. He said that the immigration issue in America are Democrats bringing these individuals in because they assume they're going to be able to increase the voting pool, right? And he believed in that conspiracy. Now, I say conspiracy, I shouldn't say that because Elon Musk just mentioned the same exact thing on Joe Rogan last week. So here's a new person, you know, that was 25 years ago that Rush Limbaugh said it, who's now echoing the same philosophy. And that is that this whole illegal immigration project was a Democratic project to get more voters. Now I say I don't have enough information to even debate someone on that topic. I don't know. I know that if you go back to Democrats and Republicans being elected, George Bush was elected twice. So did the project work? Because if that was their project, then where are all the, you know, no Republican president would ever be elected again. So I'm not sure. Now there are people. Now, can I ask you a question? Do you know if there are MAGA followers that listen to your podcast?
There are some because I've made a point of I haven't had high profile folks from the MAGAverse, although I've had a number of people who are in Trump's first administration on the show. But not so coincidentally, most, if not all, of those folks, not quite secretary level, like cabinet level, but next level, chief of staff level for cabinet members. But not so coincidentally, every single person at that level and below, others who were in his first administration, ended up leaving, leaving the administration and are now what would probably be widely considered never Trumpers. Although that's a pretty wide circle. I mean, apparently Mike Pompeo is part of the, like there are
Right.
people that I don't even understand why they're even considered never Trumpers when they were loyal to the end. And never got on to the Kamala bandwagon in 2024, and yet Mike Pompeo did something, to get his security protocol taken away. So anyway, I have to answer your question. I've also had friends who, just in recent weeks and months, I had a few folks on as part of the Meet the Majority. In other words, people who voted for Trump in this last election. I had those folks on and ended up getting folks to listen. Although the folks that I know that are the most passionate Trump fans, they don't listen to entire episodes. They might listen to the first 5 to 10 seconds of one of those short clips I've put up, but they're not going to listen to David French. I mean, David, it's almost
Right.
like he's as truly conservative as he is politically and theologically. The fact that he has openly criticized Donald Trump means you're. It's easier if you were Satan himself to walk into one of the churches that I've been a part of than be David French. He's
Right.
anathema in a lot of those evangelical
Right.
circles, which is it's inexplicable to me. So,
Right. So the only reason I asked was I would imagine if someone is MAGA, and here I am saying, I'm not really sure if this theory that Limbaugh had is true or not. I'm willing to admit I've never looked into this. I've never looked at the numbers, and I don't know whether it's a complete conspiracy or true. I'm probably 60-40, and that's just probably some truth to it, even being a Democrat all my life. Um, so in addition to that, I just started to think more and more about that Trump had one basic uh, policy that won him the election, and it just seems like a great irony that a businessman, right, who is known, that's his thing, um, would be going against what I now believe is maybe a third of your project to just create like a lower class. I mean, if I was an economist in 100 years ago, I look back at America at the illegal immigration for the past 30 years, I would say, wow, this is really interesting. America created a lower class. They created a strata, they created a caste system, and all they had to do was open the border. That's all they had to do. Now, that's kind of where my head is these days. So it's an irony that if I believe that to be true, that it was really all these corporations and their donors, and the Democrats are now just as bad as Republicans when it comes to donors, whispering in their ear, "Hey, I've got a meat factory in upstate New York near my congressman. I can't survive without cheap labor. What can you do for me? Oh, well, we'll take care of that for you." Now, again, I don't have any stats. I don't.
so
I don't.
I don't think the conversation goes exactly that way. I do think that there are related conversations that are happening because I've been in those not at the national level, but in at my state and local level. I've been on a couple of small business committees for our state assembly members, one Republican and then one Democrat, Dante Acosta, which was 2 or 3 assembly members ago, and then Christy Smith, who was uh, 1 or 2 assembly members ago. Anyway, they had me on a small business committee, and part of the conversation, because I live in the very northern part of LA County, LA County was leading the way in terms of minimum wage. LA City, LA County, and then California statewide. And fortunately, even Christy Smith, not even. I mean, I think she's terrific. She's a centrist Democrat. Did she only serve 1 term in the assembly? Either way, she had me on her committee. She knew that I was much more conservative fiscally on fiscal issues than she was. But she had me in that room and she took my concerns seriously because what we found, here's a key. Here's one of the keys is if you can get through the rhetoric and the talking points, if you can leave a lot of folks have, it used to be Rush Limbaugh's opening monologue in their head. Um, or now it's Sean Hannity, or it's Wilcow, or it's Mark Levin, the opening monologue of their radio show or the TV show in their head, which a lot of it is the left wants you to, or the left is trying to. So anybody who's not, in this case, a Rush Limbaugh fan or a Hannity fan, everybody who's not is part of the left. So me, because I don't want to kiss Donald Trump's toes and give him a massage afterwards, I have another grosser way of talking about that. But because I'm
Right.
not a Trump fan, oh, I'm part of the left, right? No, no, no. Anyway, I'm actually a I'm getting off track. I'm actually a fiscal
That's right.
conservative. So if my point is, if we can leave that opening monologue aside and see another human being, right? Now, Christy and I, in her case, she was a Democrat. She knew I was a small business conservative. We're able to say, well, she was able to discover that I genuinely care about the people that are working for our companies, right? I genuinely want to create great opportunities for them because I wasn't, a couple of the companies, it took me years to make a dime, to be able to take any distributions. I never took a salary from one company in particular, never took any distributions. So what I could derive from it, my sense of joy, my sense of accomplishment was creating opportunities for other people. I think she
Right.
understood that. She took me on good faith. So we had the same goals ultimately, but she also understood that at the end of the day, we don't have a difference in principles. We don't have necessarily a difference in values. What we have is a difference in math. Like I said, Christy, look at my P&L. I'll open my books to you. Here's what the books look like. Now, what this mandate is, it's telling me that I need to raise minimum wage by 50% over the course of 5 years. Now, my prices that we're charging our customers are a direct calculation of what my labor is. So are you telling me that I'll be able to raise my prices by 50% over the course of 5 years and not lose half of my clientele? That because the truth is, in that particular business, a window clean and pressure washing business, that particular business, my competition aren't companies like ours that are paying our taxes, that are filing all of our I-9s, that are hiring people who have legal, who are here legal with legal documentation, paying workers' comp. That's my competition. Isn't other companies like mine. My competition is Johnny Hump a Bucket, is Bucket Bob. Guys that are. There was one story where not only did this guy hire somebody who wasn't here, legally. He showed up on his job sites drunk on a regular basis, and then a couple of his workers showed up on job sites drunk, or whatever other drugs that they were doing, to the extent where one guy fell off a roof, and was permanently disabled from this accident. That they basically, so not only was that, but that's my competition. So he was paying this guy less than minimum wage. He wasn't paying any workers' comp. So of course he could charge his customers 50% less than what we're charging. He didn't have nearly expenses that I did. But not only that, this dude, he when that happened, it became a kind of this. It became known around the town. So he moves to a different town in near Denver, Colorado. Starts another window cleaning business, and he steals my name. He steals my logo. He steals like the whole thing. He basically copied and pasted my entire website. And we had a guy start with us. He said, "Hey Corey, do you got a branch in not Denver, but maybe Boulder or something like? Do you got a branch in Boulder, Colorado?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, that's crazy because looks like C Spot Go is in Boulder, Colorado. It's your dog, your logo
Wow.
and everything." Like, holy crap! So it got pretty serious. But all that to say, being in the sorry, that was a really long way around the barn.
No, it's right.
That all that to say, I think being in the room with another human being and arriving at the notion that we do share some of these values, that if you could see the human being for who they are, and not think that, oh well, you didn't vote for Trump, or you did vote for Trump, and therefore I know X, Y, and Z about you. I know all I need to know. No, no, no. We actually share a lot of the same goals. We share a lot of the same values, but the way that we arrive there is a little bit different. I'm sharing the story about minimum wage and why there are so many differences there, but I think it can be any number of issues. Part of the work, though, it's almost like I can't even get out of the garage because there's 6 feet of snow, and the 6 feet of snow that we got to clear is all of these assumptions that we have built up in our head about them, the people who
Right.
voted on one line of our ballot differently than I did. Now I know everything I need to know about you. I do so much work clearing that 6 feet of snow before I can even have a conversation with somebody. But we got to do that work. We got to do that work in order to make those reconnections. You know what I mean? I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that's
No,
where
no,
it
no,
took
it
me.
does. Let me just take a real quick step back. I wanted to choose immigration because although there are other things that eventually we're going to get to that are maybe unique to my perspective, I wanted to show that I was trying to grasp this phenomenon, and if there's more to it than a lot of people, is it a Democrat? What is it? A Democrat project? Is it really just that the corporations that control uh, both parties said, look, cheap labor is how we're going to continue this yearly, you know, uh, I don't even know the type of word for it. I worked jobs where every year you had to have a certain percentage of an increase, and it just wasn't based on reality. But I want to go back real quick to my personal opinion, and then shift to why I wanted to talk about immigration. I'm probably going to retire in South America. I don't think Asia is going to work for me. So where I'm right now, I'm surrounded by individuals who, if you looked at them, match the look of individuals coming across the border. So I totally understand that immigration to America is basically the history of civilization. Everyone wants a better life, right? I agree. That's all it is from that perspective. It's why our government allowed it, that I'm not quite sure where I'm at, but I know that Trump used that leverage to speak to the working class to vote for a billionaire to say, "Hey,
Mm, yeah, yeah.
you're gonna vote for me because I'm gonna build a wall." And this is what Hillary Clinton should have done during the debate. Okay. Now, again, I don't write comedy anymore. This may be incredibly stupid or dumb, but I'm just going to throw this out for fun. So Hillary Clinton should have said to Donald, Donald, I know you enjoy eating steak. Remember the Trump steaks? Answer a question for me. When you're eating steak and the steak knife drops to the floor, who picks up the steak knife? And he would probably say, it's all about winning, winning. Donald, just answer the question. Who picks up the steak knife? And he would say, well, an immigrant. What is that immigrant's name? Melania. So Melania picks up your steak knife. So in other words, you're now going to be America's beacon of for the working class. How that happened, the Clintons, who I'm not a fan of, she could have, during that debate, Corey, she should have focused on this over and over and over again. You're you've used illegal immigration to be where you are. You're standing here in front of America because you've used them, and now you've changed, you've shifted. So she didn't hammer him on that, right?
Yeah.
I'm just
So
I'm
so let me back up for a second. So
yeah,
you grew up Bucks County. Did you grow up in Bucks County?
I did, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how did you say you're a lifelong Democrat, but it sounds like in recent years, not so much. You're done with the two-party system kind of thing.
Yes.
Was your family Democrats? Is that how you arrived at more, like you said before, liberal positions, or how did you formulate your political kind of leanings?
Yeah, I think my father was a Korean veteran. He served in Korea. I do remember when I was a kid, they had a picture of Jesus next to a picture of JFK. Okay.
Okay. JFK Democrats, yeah.
Yeah. I was born 1 month after JFK was assassinated.
I thought you and I were about the same age. You're eight
I'm
years older than
61.
me. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I could only imagine what kind of trauma was in the household that I was born into. So it I don't think there was anything specific that I can remember about my childhood that made me a Democrat. I wanted to be an actor. I mean, you kind of fall into a group and sort of adopt that identity. But I voted. I voted Clinton, Obama, uh, um, Biden 2020. Huge mistake. So on that note, Corey, I don't have anything really. I was never really into it is that it was part of my identity.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Go ahead.
so you said something interesting, almost in passing. You said voted for Biden in 2020, huge mistake. Why do you consider it a mistake?
Okay. Well, let me go back to the immigration thing. Now
Yeah.
this now th- this is interesting that I just found this out. Right? It's 2025. I just found this out in preparation to speak to you. So I was joking with my friend. I said, here's what's going to happen. If the Democrats win in 2028, you're going to go back to sleep. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, you're so tired. And by the way, Trump's doing this on purpose. Chaos is a strategy. Advocacy is a strategy. You're going to be so tired of talking about him day after day after day. When a Democrat wins, you're going to go back to sleep. You're not going to pay attention. And what do I mean by that? I just found out that the day after Biden won the election, he reversed all of Trump's immigration policies.
Now
Now,
I got to go back and check that because it seems like some of the more high profile ones he did.
Can I?
And immigration definitely increased in that first year, but by the last year, his what do you call it? When he was sending people out was even higher. What's a word for that? Uh,
Deportation and
Deportations were,
right.
were at the highest rates, even compared to the Trump pre-COVID Trump administration.
So um, if I let me just see something really quickly. You're not going to see this, I don't think, right?
No.
So during his first day in office, Biden unveiled the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 and reversed many of Trump's policies on immigration, such as
Oh,
halting the
and just
deport.
just because this came up in our conversation,
Yeah.
what is your source?
Oh man, good question. It shows how unprepared I am. This is my source. Google is my source,
There you
man.
go.
I don't know where that came from. But why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing it up because number one, just goes to show that I'm no different than anybody else. Once my party won, I wasn't paying attention as
Right.
to what they were doing. Like I
Yeah.
voted for Obama. I couldn't tell you what the hell the guy did. Right. I used to work for Obamacare. I know Obamacare because I used to work for it. Right. So I was totally, but I was upset about that. Why was I upset about that? If a presidential candidate has basically one policy, and the people that voted for Trump he didn't represent he wasn't a conservative, he wasn't a Christian, there was nothing conservative about Trump. All he had was, hey, I'm going to put a wall up, and that worked. If that's what led for him to be in our conversation today, what do you think is going to happen when you reverse that policy on day one?
Could I tell
This
you
is the,
something? I'm going off. I know
right,
you're on a roll here, but I got to tell you because this addresses your exact point. So in 2020, I didn't just vote against someone. I actually voted for someone. Now, I could list all the reasons that I have on this show as to why I voted against Trump. I don't need to give you all the reasons because every single day he gives me more reasons as a Christian and as a conservative why I am opposed to Donald Trump. But I did vote affirmatively for Joe Biden. I was glad that he won the nomination in 2020 over and above a number of the other Democratic candidates. Now, if any number in 2016, if any number of other candidates won, Republican candidates, there's literally at least 10 of them, if not a dozen of them, that I could have envisioned voting for over Hillary. But Trump, I was not going to vote for. I already knew enough about him going back to his days when he ruined the USFL. Everything Trump touches dies. USFL,
right,
that airline, the Trump like I knew enough about him. He
right,
he bankrupted six freaking casinos. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to go into it. How do you
right,
if you're the house? The house is always supposed to win. And not only did he lose, he lost six times. Anyway, but I go off track. The reason that I voted affirmatively for Biden is
right,
because I thought of any candidate, Republican or Democrat, he had the greatest chance of working in a bipartisan fashion with colleagues across the aisle, which he did for at least a half a dozen major pieces of legislation, which I was happy to see. The Chips and Science Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the gun legislation. They didn't call it gun legislation; it was more mental health legislation. But that was John Cornyn, the Republican senator from Texas. Um, the ERA. Granted, Manchin was technically a Democrat at the time, but he was as close to center, if not even right of center. Now he's an independent. That legislation was led by Joe Manchin. And the fiscal cliffs that he avoided at least three different times, two of which were with McCarthy, who was Speaker of the House at the time. So certainly in his first 2 years as president, I believe that Joe Biden delivered the goods for what I affirmatively voted for, which was to get big pieces of bipartisan legislation passed. Now, you could argue some of those pieces of legislation, especially the one that passed in February of 2021, contributed significantly to inflation. So yeah, there's definitely criticisms to be intelligent criticisms to be made. But the biggest thing on my mind in 2020, second to how dangerous Trump was if he was given a second term,
right.
which is proving to be the case now in his second chance at the plate, was I wanted somebody who had a chance of working in a bipartisan way across the aisle. A lot of people are not only either ignorant of this fact But I get notes almost every day saying, look, seeming to be under the illusion that it was just the opposite with Joe Biden. So anyway, that's why not only did I vote, I didn't just vote against Donald Trump. I voted affirmatively for Joe Biden, even as at least a fiscally conservative and dispositionally kind of Burkean conservative, like political philosophy conservative, as I am. I had no problem voting for Biden in 2020.
Right. Let me emphasize something in talking to you that I was concerned about when I was going to do a podcast with you. I don't have near the policy history and the
It's okay, man, because at the end of the day, I'm
right.
not an expert in it. These just happen to be areas that are of particular interest to me. And I am not the expert, but one thing I have done is I found just like when you were writing, there were writers that you studied. You developed kind of a taste for who good writers are to study and to model your work after or aspire to be a little bit more like. I found experts in different fields, like David French in the legal field. He's one of the leaders of the conservative legal movement over the last 25, 30 years. So I've studied David French's work for that very reason, or Sarah Isgur, who is Jeff Sessions' uh, she was the spokesperson.
Right.
I followed certain people's work, or Anne Applebaum when it comes to foreign relations, especially Eastern Europe foreign relations. So I found experts and I've studied their work. And then, of course, develop your own opinions after that. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. If you ask me to figure out how to solve, come to a peace agreement with the Ukraine-Russia war, I'm not going to try to pretend that I can come up with that. But I read people, Alexander
Right.
Vindman, Anne Applebaum, who are experts in that kind of policy, and I take their expertise on it. Or even Israel. I have family in Israel, so I'm not going to come up with a freaking peace deal for Israel and Hamas.
Right.
So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. But you don't have to be. We're just regular guys, But this is we as much as you want to say that you don't have a horse in this race, you still do. You care about this stuff. It's always going to be where you're from, no matter where you live for the rest of your life.
Right. Well, here's the thing, and it's why I brought this up. Because I told you, 20 minutes ago, I would love to see sometimes just a common person like myself who maybe doesn't have all the history, but you can glean from what my focus is as to what might can happen. When I say I went to sleep after I voted for Biden, I did. I didn't know that his first day he'd pass that act. Now, why am I bringing it up? Here's what I'm trying to understand. I know the battle between left and right. I work for Obamacare. Okay, I used to worry that Trump was he. I think someone did this on a Friday night. That Trump was going to tweet something, and I'd be out of a job the next day. So I know how it works in politics, right? They tried to repeal Obamacare how many times, right? So I get that Biden would repeal the one policy that Trump had, but here's my question: 63 million uh, was the number of people in 2016 that voted for Trump. That's the popular vote. I did a little teeny bit of research. I wanted to get a number. What did the Democrats think was going to happen to the 63 million who voted for Trump in 2016 when they repealed the immigration? This is my question. What were they? So I didn't get the memo. I should have got an email the next day. Thank you, Gary, for voting for Joe Biden. Just so you know, we're going to repeal everything that the mean fascist, Orange Hitler, did. You should be happy about that. Because if I'd have got the menu on it and said, no, I'm not happy about that, what do you think is going to happen to people who vote for Trump? Are they going away? Is their anger going away? No, you just stoked their anger by two. So no, I'm not happy, right? I didn't get that memo. So what was the plan? That's my question.
I think that's a fair question. I think it's an entirely fair question, and I think the the answer explains why every 2 years, not just 4 years, but every 2 years, we're swinging back and forth more because just this last election in 2024, it's very clear that uh, Trump Republicans have overread the results of this election. It's very clear that what they the I'm glad he won the popular vote, but let's be clear-minded about this. Let's be honest about this. He won by the slimmest majority of any popular vote, literally since the 1800s, right? But
Correct.
he's governed as if he won, he won in a landslide, the way Ronald Reagan did in 84, 49 out of 50. He did. He didn't. Neither in the electoral college was more decisive, but the popular vote was still within 1 point. So they're overreading it. And to your point, the people who either voted for Kamala in this election or chose to sit on the couch, they're watching what he's doing. Some of them have already lost their jobs because Elon Musk's, 20-year-old, Game Boy decided to, cut 100,000 jobs or whatever the hell he did.
Right.
Even Jesse Waters on Fox News is saying, "Oh, I got a nephew who got doged." I don't know. So they're overreading their mandate. And to your point, listen, I think in 2020 and certainly in 2022, when the Republicans didn't win in the wave that had been predicted,
Right.
Democrats overread the relatively strong, midterm election in 2022, which largely is you can explain why they took such losses in 2024. It happens this way every time. 2016, 2018, you could analyze all of those election results through one party overreading the results of the prior election, and thinking what their mandate is and their actions. I honestly think that I honestly think that if more folks, if Biden's bipartisan actions truly modeled the behavior of the rest of the party, and not just the party, but the apparatchiks, the media outlets, and engendered a sense of it's not that everybody has to come to the same conclusions. It's not that everybody has to agree on everything, but compromise is the substratum of democracy. So an 80-20 piece of legislation that I get 80%, just like Ronald Reagan said, when I get 80% of what I'm advocating for, it's not, I don't take 100% loss. Giving my loyal opposition 20% in order to arrive at a compromise doesn't mean 100% loss for me. But a huge part of the problem is so many of elected officials, especially on the Republican side, and so many of my neighbors see through a lens of friend enemy, and that's it. It's categorical. Either you're my friend or you're my enemy. And as much as it seems anathema to do any comparisons to 1930s Germany, that's exactly where this political philosophy came out of.
Right.
And
And I want to get into that, but I just want to just one point about immigration from my perspective that I want to make clear. There are so many things, issues that we have to address. I told you personally how I feel about people coming to America and wanting a better life. Like I've never mentioned the word criminal once. And by the way, Donald Trump has never given a percentage, right? Because he doesn't know the percentage.
he
Now you
doesn't
could,
care. It doesn't matter
right,
because he can
right,
point to one. It's called nut picking. He points to
right.
one incident and he paints the entire group of people, anybody who crossed the border, without legal documentation, is basically the same as this one person who did this terrible crime. He understands that that's one person, right?
But
He
but
understands
this
that it's a minority of a minority of a minority. It
but
doesn't
this
matter.
is
It's
what
the
yeah,
same way that the people who protested in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, there's a very small percentage of people that indulged in criminal behavior and criminal activity. They should have been prosecuted. They should be prosecuted. They should pay for their crimes. But it doesn't mean that everybody who went out to protest in 2020 were criminals. Nor does it mean, as much as I disagree with the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th of 2021, as much as I disagree with the premise of why they were there, I strongly, strongly support their right to free assembly, to peaceably assemble, just as it says in the First Amendment, their right to free speech. And the people who were there that did not go take a dump right in the middle of the rotunda in the Capitol, the people
right.
who stayed and continued to protest peacefully or assemble peaceably, They had the right to be there. They should not be painted with the same brush as the people who are breaking into the Capitol and beating Capitol Police over the head with fire extinguishers. So that I do make that distinction as well, and I would hope most of our friends and neighbors and relatives would make that distinction as well.
Right. I just want to make this clear from a the perspective of people who see Trump and they just don't understand why people vote for him. The immigration problem has been, I'm going to put the 30-year disclaimer on it based on, I did a little research, and I think going back to Reagan when he I forget, it was the Dreamers, but it was 80, so that's 30 years. Okay. Now, in addition to it being a problem for 30 years, we now have this individual that was elected who used that policy to get where he's at. And the next president reverses it. What I'm saying personally,
Yeah.
with someone who's actually going to, it doesn't really matter that I'm going to retire. It doesn't really have anything to do with it. It has to stop. Okay.
Oh,
This policy
yeah.
that's been going for 30 years, it needs to be taken off the table. It has to be taken off the table. So as a Democrat, when I see Joe Biden do what he do, when I see Joe Biden reversing it, because I understand that's what politicians do, I get upset because I say, look, you can't, I know that your constituents hate Trump. I know you think they're going to agree with you. Trump, bad man, we're going to reverse everything he did. But you cannot ignore the 63 million people who voted for him for one reason. So if this policy remains, Corey,
Yeah.
if 4 years from now, if immigration is still something that our politicians are debating about, I mean, I'm out anyway, right? I don't live in the U.S. But at that point, I'm completely out. Because at some point in American history, Corey, there are certain things you just have to say, okay, we need to solve this and move on because we've got 200 other things that are important.
Right.
So, and I'll say one more thing. This
Yeah.
is my opinion. And if our corporate donors are upset with us that now they're going to make a little less money because they're going to have to hire teenagers instead of Guatemalans, then we're going to have to suck it up. But this has got to stop. And if Trump's appearance in our political, appearance doesn't make that clear, then the Democrats are not being honest, because the Democrats act like they hate the guy. But I'm not so sure, because there's no way that the Democrats didn't know, Corey, that if they reversed the immigration policies, Trump is going to be president in 2024. I believe that. How did they not know that? How could they not see that?
There was a lot of mistakes. Yeah, there was a lot of mistakes. Again, overreading the results of the 2020 election. There were definitely a lot of mistakes made, but that was reinforced by the results. By the lukewarm wins, if you can call it that, by the Republicans in 2022. In fact, a lot of Democrats considered that a win by retaining the Senate and not losing nearly as many seats as was predicted in 2022. So it reinforced what they saw as their strong position. So that in large part led to 2024. But you're also you're revealing. I don't know if I don't know if this is what you meant to do, but you're revealing a weakness in our system now, and it's kind of unique to now, and that is. The reason that Biden and now Trump are able to reverse course on a lot of what the prior administration has done is because it wasn't done in a deep-rooted way. The deep-rooted way, the balance of powers is supposed to include the legislative branch. Right now, the legislative branch is basically, it's the collective equivalent of persona non grata. So if what Trump had done in his first term was passed via legislation, it's not something that Biden could have overturned with the stroke of a pen. If what Biden had, the big pieces of legislation, what I was talking about before, bipartisan infrastructure, chips and science, it's not something that Trump can, he's trying, but it's not something that he can do away with the stroke of a pen because it was passed through legislation. Executive orders can be overturned with the next executive that comes in. Now, our system is being strained right now, partly because there's uh, a limp, a limp legislative branch. It's a Republican majority House and Senate. So they're basically entirely deferential to Trump. They're not really being tested because they're saying basically whatever you want, dear leader. It will be tested if the House turns to a Democratic majority in 2026. But right now, Trump is testing everything from something that is in the Constitution. He's testing, for example, birthright citizenship. That's in the Constitution. There's really no wiggle room there. But he's saying, oh, well, we're going to, write an exec. You can't really do that. But, let's see the extent to which he's going to test the judicial branch. Because right now, the judicial branch is pushing back. Now, his administration is pushing right back against it and saying, deporting some of these gang members that a federal judge put a restraining order on them being expelled from the country. And they were already on a plane when that order was handed down, a temporary restraining order.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't want to continue down this route, but I watched the footage of those people. Do you understand when I watched that, as someone who wants this whole immigration thing to be closed at some point, whose side do you think I was on? Did that judge really think they were going to put these guys back on a plane and come back? Did that judge not understand what?
So
Again,
that's where I think the virile kind of savviness of Trump kicks in, is that he understands that he's choosing issues that will have popular appeal, and that these silly little annoyances like the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment are not going to be considered when watching, for example, like me. Like some of these things that he's trying to do against Columbia University. A lot of people are just seeing the top line thing. This is where the WWE president kicks into gear. A lot of people are just seeing, oh, well, this guy that they detained. He was an anti-Semite and he was on those protests and he did all these terrible things, and he's a supporter of Hamas. And they're not looking past the headline. They're not looking past the fact that he's a legal permanent resident green card holder.
right. Now, Corey, on that note, just so I make this clear, that is a hill I would die on. The other one with the deportees, I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm not, because this is what I'm saying. This is why he exists. And you just have to.
But here's the thing. Well, let me ask you this, and I respect that. First of all, there's a lot that I respect there. One is choosing your battles, choosing what you're gonna, because there's only so much that we can get worked up about. But are you willing to sacrifice being, are you willing to sacrifice things like due process because these guys just seem so bad, they need to be kicked out? Listen, I'm the first one to admit it. When the Iraq War was first being waged, I was very much in favor of the Afghanistan part of the war, not so much in favor of Iraq. But then when I was hearing about torture on Gitmo, my thought, and this is, I don't know if I've ever shared this publicly before, but my thought is, it's freaking war. We're in a war. I don't have any sympathy for our enemies. But then, I started thinking about it. I talked to other people who understood these issues better. I came to a more, dare I say, godly position on it. And, due process and the virtues of rules of engagement and things like that are important, specifically when they are our adversaries, right?
Right.
So as much as I might agree with you, whether it's for this anti-Semite who wants to, who's chanting from the river to the sea because I have family in Israel, as much as I disagree with what he stands for, these virtues and these principles like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, these things are important specifically to protect when it's our adversary, right? And as much as I want a certain result, We have to arrive at that result in the proper way. Does that make
So
sense?
it does make sense, but and then I want to ask you two things. How much more time do we have, and can we?
Oh
Um,
shit, we've already been how long? I think we've already been talking for about an hour, right?
okay. Well, how long do your podcast last?
I don't know. I'm not Joe Rogan, so so people start dropping off at about an hour and 7 minutes is what I found.
Okay. No, no, I will totally leave this up to you. The only reason I wanted to get into the immigration thing is because so many people, literally, even 10 years into this, friends of mine on Facebook, which was, again, I don't know if I even said it's a podcast, but before the podcast, I made the decision I wasn't going to talk uh, politics, but they were so upset after Trump got elected. I
Yeah.
said, can we please talk about those circumstances? So I'm sorry, the Joe Biden decision that's a circumstance. Okay, I know you love Joe. I used to live in Wilmington. I know these people love Joe. They all voted for Joe. I voted for Joe, but they can't think. They can't think about that. They're so focused on their Trump hatred. I said, you got to go back, right? Chapter one of fascism. Let's talk about chapter one. You can't skip chapter one, right? I'm not a fan of what Biden did with immigration. You're going to have to give that to these people.
Yeah.
If these 64 million people want it to end, at some point the Democrats got to say, we you get that. We give that to you. I tell you what, I'll make a deal. You give us a
But
woman's right to choose, I'll give you illegal
But
immigration.
here's the
How
thing,
about
there
that for
was
a
a
deal?
deal. Now, listen, I grant you that there were any number of mistakes that were made, whether it's that one. I'll just, I don't know which EOs he issued, in his first days in office in 2020, early 2021, but I'll grant you that any number of mistakes were made. However, there was a deal on the table. The most conservative immigration bill was on the table. It was the senator from Oklahoma, and Trump made a call to Mike Johnson and said no. And here's why. See, I'm getting all excited. I'm throwing my pen.
Sorry.
And here's why. Because he understood that it was more valuable to him as an issue than actually solving the problem. That's why he called Mike Johnson. He didn't want to give any appearance of Joe Biden getting a win, even though it would have been Langford, a conservative Republican from Oklahoma. It would have been his victory, but he couldn't give even an ounce of a sense of victory to Biden. But that was on the table. Biden would have signed it. Biden would have gotten the Democrats behind in the House and the Senate to sign the most conservative immigration bill in history, in American history. And Trump made the call to Johnson, said, no, we can't have that. We need it
Yeah,
as
I
an
remember.
issue.
I remember that. So I have a question to you. How much do you know about what that was actually going to do? Do you know, like, see, this is the thing. The reason why the wall worked in 2016, it sounds stupid, but it's an object. It's people didn't want to hear the word bill or committee or we're going to talk about
Yeah,
it.
no, that's totally fair.
See what I'm saying?
So
Like
what you're saying is they needed to reduce it down to a 3-word summary of what the
people
bill
wanted
would
to,
do.
Corey, I'm telling you that,
I mean,
and I'm with
I
them.
could get into the weeds of
They
what
just wanted to
line items
stop.
were in that bill, but I take your point
Right.
that most people, like the groups of people, from my coffee shop, from the Pocos, from the soccer field or whatever, if you can't say it in 3 to 5 words, then it's not something that most normal people, sane people, not like me, that most people aren't gonna get their heads around. Did you solve the issue? Great.
Can I say, I keep saying one last thing because there are other things I want to get to real quick. But do you think that there is given that people hate Trump so much, that they've refused to give him a win and they would consider this a win? And personally, I'll be honest with you, Corey, I
Yeah.
don't give a flying bleep about
You can
whether
say
it's a
it,
win or
flying
not.
fuck. I already got my expletive rating. So
Yeah, I don't give a flying fuck if it's. I don't. I'm not that. I dislike the man, but I'm not going to let my hatred rule over the fact that it's very clear that in American history, this was a moment when one issue was really fueled a person who never should have been president. He never
yeah,
should have gotten this far.
right.
And I'm sorry, but the Democrats are responsible for putting that issue in his bleeping lap. And some dude like Steve Bannon saying, "Hey, man, no one solved this problem in 30 years. So you want to be president or not? Yes, take it. They gave it to you. And
Yeah.
not only did they give it to him in 2016, they gave it to him again. He's
Yeah.
president twice.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it. Just fucking give it to him, man.
Yeah.
Stop it. Just let him. We want to be done with this dude. And you're
Yeah.
never going to be done with him if you reverse the one thing that got him to be president. That's all I'm saying. Now, you know
Okay.
how I feel about immigrants? I'm not a Tucker Carlson or Ann Coulter who hate it because they're not white and they're from Sweden. I get that. I've listened to them. They're wrong. The criminal part of it is wrong. The Republican part of it, they don't even know how to frame it. And the Democrats can't frame it either, right? They're both lying about it. The
Right.
truth is, it was a corporate project for cheap labor. We've created a lower class in America. That's the bottom line for me, and it ends. And if the people who are going to go out of business because they don't have cheap labor, they're going to have to work something out. Now I know that sounds stupid to say. Like if economists is listening to me, they're going to say, "What about strawberries and the meatpacking plants?" And I'm saying, I don't care what it is. We can figure it out.
We
But
can figure it out as long as so what Christy I was referring to that story before when minimum wage was coming up. Um, what Christy did was she found other line items to work with us on. Now we didn't get it, but the fact that she genuinely went to the house to the assembly floor and her Democratic colleagues and worked the legislation didn't pass, but she worked language into the legislation to account for other burdens that we were carrying to lighten the load, so that we could. In our case, it was workers' comp. She was trying to get us relief in workers' comp so that we could put more in directly into the wages of our employees. I thought that was a creative solution. It was an 80-20, 80% in the in the Democrats' favor. But listen, the fact that she went to bat for us and found some sort of solution, found some sort of relief, because we're not all, Mark Zuckerberg. A lot of us are still, hand to mouth. We're bootstrapped organizations just trying to figure out how to meet payroll. So that's the other thing on that particular issue. But you said you had a question or two for me.
no, I think I'm done.
Okay.
And because I have there are other things that you kind of topics that you may not have ever talked about with people. So I'd like to go and again, you're the director here. So there are other things I really do want to maybe get off my chest before I skedaddle out of here.
All right. I have a question for you. This is my
Sure.
TPNR question because we do have to wrap it up here pretty quick. The TPNR question, talk politics and religion without killing each other. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So that's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other, or is it even possible?
I think we're all being played.
Oh,
Okay. I'll give you my um, I think I said this to you in one of the comments in the podcast. My heading for America would be um, we lost the war, didn't even realize we've lost it. Right? We're living in a post-war society. We just don't realize it. At some point, the two-party system and how it has gotten so deep into our psyches and who we are and our identity and everything, it's insane. When I tell you that I can't talk to people, I mean that. I mean, I'm glad I'm not living in the US anymore. I don't have to talk politics at all. For 2.5 years, I didn't have one conversation about it, and I loved it because people in other countries, they're not separated like we are, not even close. And if we're ever going to do anything about, okay, I probably shouldn't go here as the last answer, but if we're ever going to do about who really runs America, which is military industrial complex and the corporations, we're going to have to get together to do it. And that's never going to happen. And I truly think that there are Democrats who say they hate Trump, but are glad he won in 2024.
really?
Because, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, can I prove it? Do I have the receipts yet? I put money on it 5 or 10 years from now. There's going to be a memo in some congressman's office that says, dude, all we have is abortion. And we are not Trump. We got two policies. Abortion, we're not Trump. We need Trump. Because if we reveal to the American people that we are we're all about corporation donors, and we're not who we are anymore. If that gets revealed to the American public that we don't give a fuck about them anymore, we never did. We played against Republicans. Remember when I was growing up, the Republicans were the party of business, and the Democrats were the good guys. Now that's bullshit. Those days are over. And I'm a Democrat saying this, and I could get into the details, but I don't have enough time. They're not the good guys anymore, and
Mm.
they don't. And they're trying to figure out a way to convince the public they're still the good guys. So all they say is, "Well, we're not Trump. Christ, we're not that guy," and that's their policy. So when I think they reversed the immigration policies, I think there were there were people in the room that said, "Okay, you're going to reelect Trump." I'm sorry. I know you think it sounds like a conspiracy, but it makes no sense that the one thing he had, they said we're not going to give those 64 million people the satisfaction. We're not going to give it to them. I don't
So,
care. You got at some point, Democrats have to say, "Hey, man, I know we're pretending we're the party of the little guy, and we've gotten away for it because we elected the first African American, maybe the first woman in 2016. 2024 was the first woman African American Indian. That's our play. It doesn't work anymore. The American people have read the Democratic playbook, and they're saying you're full of shit, which is why Donald Trump is president. So they got to come up with something,
yeah.
right?
So let me push back on that.
Yeah.
One is I want you to have more conversations about any number of these issues. Whether it's with me or anybody else, even if it's in Peru, I'd love for you to come back. And if you tell me, a couple months in advance or even a month in advance that you're going to be in Bucks County, I'll make a trip and we'll all hang out at Poco's and maybe go visit David and, you know, do that stuff.
Right.
But
Right.
here's this is I'm not even joking. The reason is I think a lot of us, number one, a lot of us are a lot more nuanced in our real views when we start digging into them than what we perceive. Now there are studies about that that we misunderstand people who disagree with us on one particular issue. We whether it's somebody who identifies purely as a Democrat, somebody who identifies purely, there's there is a lot of data about that. Um, but what we also know is that the people who are most extreme in their views are taking up a vast majority of the oxygen out of the room. So now a lot of folks who do care are backing away from these conversations partly because I mean, I know in my case, I'm tired of getting screamed at. I'm tired of, getting into a conversation or walking into a room, and if I'm one of the people who has a minority view, getting screamed at about it. So that's not fun for me, right? So a lot of us end up backing away from those conversations altogether. I think that those of us who have more nuanced views, who aren't so categorical in our views, we need to take some space back in the public square. We need to take some space. So I want you to take some of that space back, right? I want to encourage you to continue to do that now, like I'm talking to you like your pastor, or your rabbi or something.
Right.
I want to encourage you to do it because I think one of the frustrations that maybe you have is a lot of what you've talked about are big issues, huge issues. And we have so little control over these big issues. You said 64 million people a few times. Yeah, it's hard for a guy like me to move 64 million votes or to convince 64 million people or even 4 million people to change their vote. It's hard for a guy but there is such, Heschel referred to it as a sanctity in the mundane, the seemingly mundane, right? And there's such a sanctity in this conversation. Even if we didn't share it with another soul, right? Even if this didn't go out in the potosphere, um, even if that was it, and I have plenty of these conversations. My partner, a really dear friend of mine, might hit me up today and be like, "Hey," when he just hits me up with a text, "Docs." We don't have we're all virtual now in this business. So
Right.
when he says docs, it's a bar that we meet at, a local bar, total dive. It's great. And
Okay.
that's where we meet about once a week, so we catch up on all the business that we need to talk about. Um, but he and I are in there's a lot that we really, really agree on, but on the Trump thing, we don't agree at all. You know, one of us gets each other talking to we call it talking to the ceilings. But there's a sanctity in the mundane. There's a sanctity in the one-on-one conversation. And I
Right.
think if folks understand, and they're folks don't feel like they're doing anything. They don't feel like they're moving 4 million votes or 64 million votes, but they're moving one heart. They're moving one heart, at least to say this one person who voted differently than I did at the top of the ticket is somebody that I know and I care about, is somebody that I see as more complex than what that one vote would otherwise have me define them completely as, right? So I think that your one-on-one conversations, whether they're shared with 10,000 people on a podcast, um, or just one-on-one, and it's left in the, in the coffee shop, in the cafe where you're having it, there's a sanctity to that, and it is having an effect. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Can, can I give you one more answer?
What if I said no?
Then I would accept
Just
it,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you shit now. Go ahead.
because here's what's happening. I had a lot of things prepared, and I realized I've only gotten to half of
Well,
them.
you got to
But
come back. We got to talk some more.
yeah, and I don't want to talk about any specifics. I
Okay.
want to talk about a more broader thing. But I will leave you with this. I had a friend on Facebook, um, and I don't think you know him, but he was in our class
Okay.
briefly, and he's a liberal and he hates Trump, and he posted a post of a bunch of uh, it was a post of a cult, right? I don't know if you've ever seen the meme of a bunch of people all dressed the same. And he wanted to make it clear that MAGA is a cult, okay, to me. Now, I don't engage with him because I think he still watches MSNBC. I call Rachel Hannity. Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow are the same person. Now, I can't prove it, but it's going to give me
Have you
10
ever
years.
seen them in the same room at the same
They
time?
are the same person. So the fact that he still watches propaganda, he has no right to be sending these tweets out about another group of people being in a cult. And I wanted to say to him, okay, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to take all your posts. I want you to put them in a spreadsheet, and I want you to show that spreadsheet to a psychologist. And I have a feeling that psychologist is going to say, hey, dude, I know that you posted that MAGA is a cult, but man, you're a true believer, man. Like everything from your side, if you don't think you're in a cult, then you got problems. So yeah, you keep telling me that MAGA is a cult. Yeah, this is my advice to when I say the system and I talk to my fellow Americans, man, this whole hatred thing and left and right, it's gotten to the point where I can't talk to people, and all I can tell them is, would you please just evaluate yourself? If you're a Democrat and you don't think you have any responsibility for Donald Trump, you and I are going to part ways, because you better be what Democrats are supposed to be, right? I was growing up thinking the Democrats were the nuanced. We read books. We knew life was complicated. The Republicans were the simple, are you against the war or are you for the war? Are you pro-American or anti-American? And I hated that shit. And we were the ones that were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's more complicated. Now we're the ones sending memes out that's calling the other people cults, and we can't even see that we're in one ourselves. So it's shifted. Now, there's a guy named Chris Hedges, and I'm going to just mention his name. I think he said something really interesting. He said, the Democrats have become the Republicans, and the Republicans are still trying to they're grappling with this whole Trump thing. And I'm trying to reach out to my Democrat friends and say, you're convinced you're the good guys here because you got this Trump figure, and it makes it really easy because you just say, hey, I hate Trump, and everyone says, yeah, well, so do I. But you're not as you got to look at your history. You got to look at where you're going, and you got to look at the Democrats are not who they say they were. Right, 30 years ago, they've changed. And the reason you don't know that they've changed is you're spending all your time worried about Donald fucking Trump.
Yeah.
And you need to pay attention to to why Hillary Clinton still has control. And okay, one last thing. It's a fact, but it drives me nuts. Hillary Clinton accused Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian spy. And why? Because Tulsi Gabbard had a different opinion about the Syrian war. And I tell my Democratic friends, go back to the history about the Clintons and who separated the Democrats from the working class. It was the Clintons. Why is Hillary Clinton still telling another candidate for president that she's a Russian asset? And then that woman goes over to the Republican side. Now, whatever you think about Tulsi Gabbard or not is not the point. The Clintons still have control over that fucking party. That happened. She did it she did it live on air. Hillary Clinton said Tulsi Gabbard, another candidate for president, is a Russian asset. Now, my Democrat friends need to focus on that. Get your focus off Donald Trump for just a minute, just a day, and ask yourself, why was someone who served this nation in battle versus a neocon like Hillary Clinton, is she really a Russian asset, or am I being played here? The Clintons got to go. They've been influencing the Democrats, I'm telling you, man, for 30, 40 years. And my Democrat friends can't see it. And Hillary Clinton did it in public. Like, she should have been gone after that. You're accusing a person who served in the military of being a Russian asset, who's a candidate for president, and then she goes to Trump. She's working for Trump. She's a freaking in the cabinet. Like, yeah. Hillary Clinton it's insane. Yeah. And this is the point. So final point. This is what I tell my friends. Listen, your hatred for Trump is ruining your ability to do what Democrats were good at, which is introspection, which you just talked about, introspection, and where your responsibility lies in this thing. So, and if you don't share that with me, if I don't think you're being introspective about the Democrats, then I'm sorry. It isn't that we disagree, but the information I have isn't going to help you, because I know for a fact that the Clintons still have the Democrats in a vice, and you got to get rid of them. Now, hopefully, Bill will die soon, but
Stop! You can't say that.
I know, but anyway, that's what I'm trying to say. Please, your hatred for this guy Trump, man, you gotta focus on your own party, man. They are not who they say they are. They just aren't.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we could go for another hour and a half, 2 hours at least. But I do hope that we get to have some more conversations. And listen, drop in anytime, man. Like there are I was encouraged to see, and at first I didn't know who it was because you were using your middle name and not your last name. So but I was encouraged to see it, and I even the parts where it seemed like we were disagreeing and we were pushing back on each other. I appreciated that because I felt like even though I didn't at first spot remember who you were, and then when I saw your picture, I'm like, oh, that's freaking Gary.
Right, right.
But the content of how you were going about it felt genuinely inquisitive, and coming from a place of good faith, even points of disagreement, and with everybody that you interacted with on that thread. So I welcome it. I really appreciate you. And I'm glad to do this. I'm glad to, kind of reconnect with you. So this has been fun for me, man. Thanks for doing it.
You're welcome. And I'm a little bit worried about the comments, but I'm going to have to, if I take a hit, I'm going to have to take a hit because, it is what it is. Like, I got to make sure that I've got a thick skin. If people say, man, this guy, what the bleep is he talking about? So
some of the stuff that we did in George's upstairs at Poco's, some of the stuff we did there, everybody had to have had a thick skin, So, and I think, and here's the other thing is, I'm trying to think who'd be, listening to this conversation from those classes, from those days. But the thing is, even if you said things that some folks might disagree with, they know you. You know what I mean? So there's like there's more substance there. There's more, I don't know, grist there for us to have these kinds of conversations.
On that note, would you post this in the George DiCenzo group? Because I have a feeling the members would appreciate seeing me, you and I go at it.
That's a good idea. Let me see if there's some shorter clips, or maybe just I'll post the YouTube link, and folks can enjoy it that way. you know what I'll do is, I'll ask permission. I just want to make sure we're not crossing any, so I'll ask permission. But, either way, I think it was fun, and Pete, like I said, um, I think if somebody said it's not appropriate, it would only be because it's not germane to the main subject of that group, being
Right.
theater and film and writing and you know, um, but we're mishpacha, like we're George DiCenzo mishpacha. So
Right.
anyway, thanks again for doing this, Gary. It was great to hang out with you a little bit. I wish we were actually in person putting back a beer.
Yeah, you're welcome. Listen, I don't know where I'm going to be a year from now, but hey, am I going to be able to watch this at some
Yeah,
point?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but you'll have to trust me. I don't get I don't get notes before I post stuff.
I hear you.
Hope you're okay with that.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I'm gonna cut it and paste it and cut it and paste so that I look like a brilliant scholar and I make you look terrible. I'm kidding. I'm
Yeah.
totally
Don't,
kidding.
hey, one thing you don't cut that I predicted that Rachel Maddow and Sean Hannity are the same person.
Okay.
I want you to keep that in.
This is all staying in. It's all staying
All
in.
right.
All right, man. Good to see you.
All right.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write the review, like I was saying before, and watch these conversations on YouTube, youtube.com/at politics and religion. And then Patreon is patreon.com/politics and religion. Your support really does make a difference. So thank you for all of it. Now go talk some politics and religion, but with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.